Kia ora. It has been a little while since you've seen Josh or I's faces around here. Unfortunately, 2020 took us for a little bit of a ride, but we are super excited to be back and bringing you some awesome content in coming weeks and months. Now, today what I wanted to talk to you guys about is tokens, which is one of my favorite areas of Marketo. If you, like many others, have had 2020 kind of kick you in the butt, and you are trying to do a lot more work with a lot less resource, and you're not using tokens, or at least not using them effectively, then this is the video for you. Tokens are one of my favorite things in Marketo, and they basically let you scale your instance, do a little bit of personalization, make things a little bit more dynamic, and make things super consistent, and make it a lot easier to create a lot of programs on the fly without having to get into the weeds, which is something that I think this year a lot of people are needing to do. So if it sounds like something that's interesting to you, then stick around and let's jump in. So what is a token to start with? Well, it's a variable that you can use across a bunch of different areas in Marketo, like emails and landing pages and flow steps, to populate a specific piece of information. In Marketo, as far as I tend to classify them, there's effectively 4 different types of tokens. There are the kind of tokens that you can use to pull information from specific records in Marketo. So that's where your person tokens and your company tokens come into play. And the most common use case you will see for those at any point will probably be putting someone's first name into the opening section of an email. Then you have the kinds of tokens that you use to pull information about specific processes and things that are happening in the system. And that's where your campaign tokens, trigger tokens, and program tokens come into play. They're really useful for scenarios like populating a unique webinar link into a webinar confirmation email, or for populating information about a triggering event into a interesting moment field. You also have system tokens, which covers things like your unsubscribe link, your view online link, or your forward to friend link. And there's also system tokens that will stamp the date or a date time of when something in the system ran. So if you want to record the date and time that someone unsubscribed from your brand, you can use a system date time token for that. But the main kind of token I want to focus on today is my tokens, because they are the ones that will really help you scale, in my opinion. So my token lives in marketing activities, and it can either be in folder levels or in programs. And what's really cool about them is that when you put a my token in a folder or in a program, it gets inherited down to everything that lives within that folder or within that program. So if you want to control specific recurring details across your instance, things like legal disclaimers, like your copyright information, like your brand name, like your brand colors, my tokens are really powerful ways to do this. And when they get super interesting is when you're trying to manage multiple brands, multiple regions, multiple different types of products, any of those kinds of things across a single instance. They're also super helpful for program templates. So if you are starting out building programs in your instance by cloning from a center of excellence, cloning pre-built structures for programs, you can tokenize those quite heavily in order to avoid having to spend too much time in the editor, and instead just jump into your tokens and update specific details across there in order to make building out your programs faster. They're incredibly helpful, incredibly powerful, and they are what we are going to focus on today. So what we're going to do next is go through in the system the different types of my tokens that you can get, and then we're going to look at a demo that I've already set up of some of the cool ways that you can apply those. So let's jump into the system. Alright, so here I am inside Marketo. Now, if you are ever in a parent folder level in Marketo and marketing activities, you will notice that there is a My Tokens tab here in the dash. And if you click on it, you'll see a section here that shows you whatever tokens are currently in this folder. There's a section here that's titled Local. And that's because any tokens that sit within the local section are tokens that have been created inside this specific folder. As you get further down and jump back into the My Tokens tab, anytime you're in a folder that sits under that main folder, you'll see it switches to inherited. What you can also do here is overwrite these if you want to, but you want to be careful about how and when you use the overwrite functionality. An overridden token can be very hard to override, which can kind of defeat the purpose of using tokens sometimes. If you override them in lots of places, anytime you want to update it, you then have to go and update it in all of those individual areas where it's been overridden. It's kind of a known bug in the system that once you've overridden it, you can't delete the overridden version and go back to the original inherited version, not very easily at least. You tend to have to go and find every single place within that folder that the inherited token exists, and it becomes painful. So be careful about when you choose to override tokens. And on the right hand side, you'll see all of the different token types available. So let's run through those. First up, you've got the calendar file token. Now, this is super helpful if you are creating events in Marketo. So if you're doing webinars, or one day again at some point in the future doing live events, you can populate a calendar file with information about your event in order to produce an ICS file. And if you put this token into an email or a landing page in your event program, people will be able to download the ICS file with all of this information in it and add it to their calendar. Cool things to know about calendar files. This is one of the few token types actually, where you can reference other My tokens. That is not something you can do across pretty much any other token type. If you're doing a webinar, you can put the personalized webinar link into the description box, which is super handy. Something to keep in mind about calendar file tokens: it is an ICS file, and not all calendar types recognize ICS, or at least not very easily. So it will work totally fine on Outlook, but it doesn't work very well with Google Calendar. So if you know a lot of your database uses Google for emails, you may want to look at another methodology for doing this part. But calendar file token is still quite useful. Second up, you've got the date type token, and this lets you access one of those scrolly calendar things that Marketo has all over the place, which is super helpful. One thing to keep in mind about a calendar type token though is that what it actually outputs is a date in the format year dash month dash day. That is not always the most readable or customer friendly output, so it can be useful in certain circumstances. But if what you're trying to do is populate, say, the date of an event into an email, you may want to use a different type of token in order to output a slightly more friendly version. The next kind of token that you will come across is an email script token. Email script tokens run on Velocity, which, as I understand it, is a type of Java, and they are not my area of expertise. I could not possibly hope to do justice to this incredibly complicated and incredibly awesome topic in this video. There are far more knowledgeable, far more experienced people who can speak to this subject. If you are really interested in email script tokens, I highly recommend Samford Whiteman's blog, which we'll try to link below. There's also tons of information about Velocity Script and email tokens in the Marketo community. I'm sure there's a bunch of Marketo blogs. And there's also some really thorough documentation about Velocity Script available on the web. But I will try to give you, as best as I can, a bit of a summary of what they are and how they work and how they might benefit you. So, like I said, they run on Velocity Script, and they basically give you access to all of the different objects that you have in Marketo and let you effectively build much more complex dynamic content based on the information. So you can do things like completely change the format of a date. Say you've got a date written to a lead field and you want to output it in an email, but it's written in year, month, day format, and you want to output it as like the 10th of January. You can use Velocity Script to do that. You can also use Velocity Script to do things like strip apart bulk data that's all been inputted into a single field, find a specific variable in that data, and then output a different version of a banner or some text or a button, or a banner and some text and a button all at once. that can be super helpful if you have information coming from third-party systems and you don't have the structure in place in your instance to have the right kind of object set up with all of the information available there. There are nearly infinite ways that you can use an email script token. It's a really steep learning curve. It is, like I said, very much not my area of expertise. How I have figured out how to use them is really by going online, seeing what Samford has said, seeing what other people have said, and copying stuff, pasting it, breaking it, figuring out how I broke it, trying to fix it, and eventually kind of pulling something together. If you have access to a developer who is familiar with Java, then they should be able to help you out with a lot of this, and you will probably find it enormously valuable. When you get to a point where you are able to use Velocity Script effectively, you'll probably find that it exponentially explodes the kind of flexibility and the kind of relevant personalization that you're able to do in your emails. They are incredibly powerful, and I cannot understate that. They will blow your mind with the kinds of things that they can do. Caveats obviously being you probably want to have access to a developer. They're complicated. They're called email script tokens because they only work in email. You cannot use them in landing pages. And also you want to be really careful with using them when you are not familiar with how they work, because they're very easy to break, and sometimes you won't know that they're broken until it's customer facing that there's an issue. So the preview of an email won't always show you when an email script token is not working as you expect it, and sending a sample also won't always. The safest way to test a Velocity Script token is to create a smart campaign to send yourself the email that you're using the token in. And you generally want to be very careful about making sure you've accounted for all of the possible scenarios, otherwise things can go astray for a handful of people, and sometimes that can break the entire email. So you want to be careful, but they're super powerful. With great power comes great responsibility, I guess. Fourth up on the list, you will find image tokens. Now, image tokens are a relatively new addition to the My Token range. Like this says, you basically just get to insert an image URL. We pretty much always all just used text tokens before this image token became available. It's actually so new it's not even in the token documentation. But basically that's it. You put a URL for an image in there and it populates it into an email or a landing page. Up next, you've got number tokens, and these are pretty straightforward. You can enter numbers and you cannot enter text. Number field. Rich text tokens are super useful because they give you access to a full WYSIWYG editor. So if you want to put information across multiple assets from emails to landing pages, but you want to have things formatted a specific way, say you want to put bullet points in there or something like that, that's when you probably want to look at using a rich text token. Super helpful for those sorts of things. Second to last is score tokens. Now, score tokens are one of those ones that aren't necessarily immediately obvious how they're beneficial to people, but if you've ever built out a scoring program in Marketo, you'll know it can get quite hard to keep track of exactly what you're doing with your scoring methodology. You end up with different additions and subtractions and evening outs across a bunch of different Smart Campaign flow steps, and it gets really hard to find a single point of visibility over exactly how you're doing all of it. So if you end up discovering that your methodology isn't working, it becomes really difficult to go through and figure out exactly which little bits and pieces you can change. Really difficult, really time consuming too. So if you're using score tokens to do your plus 20, minus 20, and so on and so forth, you end up with, especially if you're doing it all in a single program, or if you put all of your scores in a parent program, a parent folder that's hosting all of your scoring programs, you'll get way more visibility in a single point where you get to go in and make any changes that you need to whenever you need to without having to dive into the nitty-gritty all the time. It's super helpful. It will save you a lot of stress. It'll save you a lot of time. And last but certainly not least is the plain text token. Now, these are probably, inarguably, the most flexible type of token you can get other than maybe email script tokens, because you can kind of do anything with them. It is just plain text. So you can populate your CTAs into them, or you could make it how you control your UTM structure. It can be how you put images in if you don't want to use the image token. You can put HTML in there and it will output properly. You can put the name of an event and have that across all of the different assets that are related to that event. There are so many different ways that you can use a text token, and most of the time when I'm using tokens, text tokens are the ones that seem to come up over and over again. They are super flexible, they are super helpful, and probably my favorite of all of the my token types available here. So now that we've gone through all of the different types of my tokens that are available, what we're going to do is look at some of the ways that you can use them. And fortunately, here's something I prepared earlier. So in this sandbox, we have got a folder for the Automation Geeks. And if we jump into the My Tokens tag of that Automation Geeks folder, you'll see no new tokens happening here. It's just the ones that it's inherited from the parent folder above. But you'll see there are other folders here. We've got one which holds program templates, and we've got two different folders here underneath that. One called the Automation Geeks and another one called the Manulation Nerds. What I have basically set up here is a way to show you how you could, if you wanted to, run two different brands using the same program templates and the same landing page and email templates, all controlling everything you need to through tokens. This is kind of an extreme example and probably not exactly going to work for everyone, because it can make the editor experience for both the landing pages and the email templates a little bit weird, and it can confuse some people. But the objective here is to kind of show you just how far you can take things if you want to, and if you're comfortable with pretty much doing everything you need to as a very templatized version, where you're controlling pretty much all of the things that change across a program with tokens and not really ever having to go into the editor. Let me show you what I mean. So if I jump into this program templates folder, you'll see I've got a webinar program template here. And if I jump into the My Tokens tab, you'll see I've got a bunch of tokens set up. There are plain text tokens, there are rich text tokens, and there are image tokens. Only those three in this case, because they're really the most common ones that you will use and the easiest ones to showcase for this specific purpose. In this program template, I have just populated everything with placeholder values so that anytime anyone clones that program template, it's very readily obvious which details need to be changed and what kind of format they're supposed to be in. That is particularly important if you're using program templates, because it can get really confusing if you've got the time of an event, using events as an example, or the day of an event, if you don't have those placeholders there for people to be able to see exactly what format that time or that day is supposed to be in order for it to make sense when the token is actually detailed into the assets across the program. So those are the different tokens that we have in place. If we jump into the program and have a look at the assets, so now we're in the email editor, and you'll see there are a bunch of token references throughout here. So we've got all of the sender information controlled through tokens, and you will notice those are not tokens that are visible in this program template because they're not in this folder, they're in these two folders. You'll also see then we've got all of our typical event tokens going on here, all things that are visible in this section. So it looks a little weird in the editor, and it looks doubly weird because what I've also done here is controlled most of the template, all of these things that change based on a brand with tokens too. So typically, yes, you would see these token references, but what you're also seeing here right now is that the color of the header isn't populated, the logo isn't populated, the fonts are not populated, and none of this information in the footer is populated either, because in this specific scenario I've set up one template that works for two brands. If we jump into the preview of the email, you'll now see all of the information that's pulled through from that template from in here is all visible now in here. So that's an important thing to keep in mind with tokens, is that they do not populate in the editor. They populate when you preview or when you send or when you approve a landing page asset and you view the approved version. You will not see the values in the editor, you'll only see the tokens themselves. And that can dictate to a degree the way in which you choose to use tokens. For example, in this specific scenario, the way that I've tokenized this email template, I have done that before in companies and then realized it didn't work and switched it back to not tokenizing all of the brand details in the template, because for some users who are not familiar with some of these kinds of ways of setting things up, that as an experience can be super confusing. So again, for this specific example, what I'm really trying to do is show you the full extent to what you can do if you tokenize everything. So that's the email. And if we jump into the landing page, you'll see, again, same kind of scenario, right? The whole thing looks very blank and very weird. But when we preview, you'll see, again, all of those tokenized variables pop through. So in a nutshell, basically at the moment, I've got a program template set up. That program template is heavily tokenized. And the idea is basically that when I clone this program template, I can go in, update those tokens, and they will populate through to the email editor, to the email asset, to the landing page asset, without me actually having to jump into the editor for either of those assets and make any changes. Here's that in action. So like I mentioned before, I've got two folders here, one for the automation geeks and one for the manualation nerds. Two completely different brands. They have absolutely nothing in common. They are complete opposites of one another, and they are fully independent. They're run by different people. They do different things. So let's see now what happens if you clone a heavily tokenized program template into some brand folders that are also tokenized. So if I jump into this Automation Geeks folder, you'll see, in addition to some inherited tokens that it's got, there's now a whole suite of additional tokens available that are really all talking about brand. So we've got the brand name, information about the brand, some important links. We're also controlling brand colors using text tokens, contact information, fonts, and a logo image file. So we're basically controlling all of those key brand elements using tokens. I've also pre-cloned that program template into here. So we've got a tag webinar, and I've gone through and updated all of these tokens. So you just double click into them, edit the information that you want to have available. This doesn't have anything different to the tokens that we already saw in the program template. All I've done is gone through and updated the values of those tokens. But if we jump into those assets, so the email and the landing page that we looked at before, you'll see they now look remarkably different. So where previously we had an email that was displaying in Times New Roman, the logo banner was bright blue, there was no logo image, none of the footer information was populated, and all of the event-specific information was all just placeholder text, without me having to go into the editor, simply by having the brand folder tokens pull through because the program is living under that folder, and by going into the program and updating the token values, we now have this. A fully built out email that I have not had to touch in the editor at all. It's completely populated by tokens. So by running all of the sender information through tokens in the brand folder level, we're pretty consistently able to guarantee that the from name, the from address, and the reply to email address will always be presented as is appropriate for the brand. We've also got the tag logo and our brand colors up here. We've got a very lovely picture of some happy little otters, and all of the information we populated about our webinar in those tokens. Plus a lovely little ditty of information about your speakers. And some great information in the footer. So again, all of that populated by tokens didn't have to go into the editor at all. And you can imagine how much faster it is to clone that into this folder and update those details than it is to do that across that email specifically. But wait, there's more. Here's what the landing page looks like. Again, very different to the landing page that we looked at in the template because it's been populated by all of the brand information. If we disregard the fact that the form looks crap, you'll see everything is on brand, all of the text has come through appropriately, and we've got a lot of the same information from the email available here. So information about speakers, we've got our copyright and our brand down here, and all of this stuff. Again, I did not have to open the landing page editor in order to do this, and I didn't have to do any of the information for the landing page or the email separately. It's all the same info, pulled from the tokens, takes you like 3 or 4 minutes to populate all of that information if you have it available, and it's so much easier, so much faster. Lets me basically create a webinar program in like 15 minutes if I need to, if it's well set up and if there's not a huge amount of difference. And again, just jumping back into that tokens section, you'll see all of the specific information for this specific event that I've got set up here, and all of the brand information that's been inherited into this program. So again, for clarity, because this webinar program lives within this brand folder and all of these tokens are populated here, they then waterfall down into this program, are accessible by all of the assets in this program. So anywhere these brand tokens are referenced, they populate with the values predetermined in this folder. Awesome. Let's see what happens if we move on to the next brand. So the Manulation Nerds is a totally real, completely exists, definitely not fake brand that has nothing to do with the automation geeks. And if you jump in here, you'll see I've populated all of the information for their specific event, and you'll see it's quite different. All of the same tokens, again, but all completely different values. So if I jump into each of these assets, we'll see how different they look compared to the ones we looked at before. So here's the Manulation Nerds version of that email. We've got all of their specific sender information, their subject line, we've got the information specific to their webinar, and you'll see it looks very different. We've got a different logo, a different header image, the font is even different. It's in a very serious Comic Sans. We've got all of the specific information about the event that they are doing, and we've got pictures of the hosts that are running the webinar for the Manulation Nerds, who are definitely not me and Josh. And again, all of the footer information has been populated dynamically. You'll see the bones of the template are the same. Most of the overall style of the way things are structured is the same. There are a lot of similarities between the two, but the specific brand details and styling are very different. If we jump into the landing page, you'll see the same. Same structure as the other one, but all of the information for the Manulation Nerds, for their specific event, and their specific definitely not Josh and I hosts. Two very different brands, two very different events, very scalable, very templatized, not always going to be the most creative solution. It's obviously very, like, across both of those landing pages, both of those emails, the structure is the same. But if you want to scale stuff really quickly, using heavily tokenized program templates can be a really effective way to go. And of course, if you need to, you can jump into those editors and make little tweaks, make little differences here and there for, say you're in a scenario where you need 3 speakers instead of 2. Or you want to put an extra banner in here, or you want to put a video in, or whatever. You can always jump into the editor to do those things, but the bones of it can be run on the tokens, and those bones will be much, much faster to set up. And In a nutshell, that's tokens, or at the very least my tokens. Hopefully, if you are struggling with figuring out how to scale your instance and use Marketo more effectively in this kind of screaming hellfire that is 2020, this has been slightly useful to you. Ideally, what you should have taken from this is that if you are managing multiple brands, multiple regions, multiple products across a single instance, if you are looking for ways to standardize and scale some of those pieces of information that appear in multiple places that at some point in time you may need to change and not want to change across 400 emails, that tokens could be a really helpful way of allowing you to do that. Hopefully it sparked an interest for you in finding out more about velocity script tokens, or looking into creating some program templates that are heavily tokenized that will allow you to do some of those repeated processes that you're running a little bit faster next time you need to. Tokens are not always the most creative solution, but you can always jump into the editor if you need to make some more specific changes to any given circumstance. And scalability, I think, is a big focus for a lot of people in this crazy year. So hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it sparked some interest. We will try to put some information below with some useful links for places you can go to find out more about this sort of stuff. And you can always comment below if you have any questions, or you can find Josh and I in any of the myriad of places you can normally find us each. Ka kite anō, happy tokenizing, and we will see you on the next one.